Hello and welcome to this webinar on establishing boundaries. Thank you everyone for joining us today. My name is Johanna and I'm a business psychologist at Thrive. With me I have Elisa Macris, who's also a business psychologist at Thrive. Hi Elisa.
Hi everyone, thank you very much for joining us.
So for those who have not joined other webinars of us, there will be a Q&A session in the end, and yeah, if you'd like to ask any question during the webinar, feel free to write it in the Q&A section, and Elisa will interrupt me or we will come to it in the end. We will also record this session for those who are not able to attend the webinar or would like to listen to it again at a later point of time, but the questions which you write in the Q&A will not be visible there. So, what are boundaries? Personal boundaries are the limits and rules we set for ourselves within relationships and help us to identify a healthy sense of, what we are, ourselves and others. And a person with a healthy relation, with healthy boundaries, can say no to others when they want to, or if they feel they can't help them, for example. But they are also comfortable opening themselves up to intimacy and close relationships. So having the ability to trust your partner, for example. And they are determined by the amount of physical and emotional space you allow between yourself and others. And personal boundaries help you decide what types of communication, behavior, and interaction are acceptable, for example. And obviously sometimes they can be hard to define because the lines are really invisible or they can change. So on the setting we are in, and they're really unique to each individual. So first I will go a bit more in depth to help you to understand what kind of boundaries that we have. And then we'll go a bit more in depth in why are they important? So what are healthy and unhealthy boundaries? And then we'll provide you with some key tips how you can establish a clearer boundary, for example, or what you can do if you face specific struggles. So we touched on what are boundaries a bit. I will provide you with the more specification of these. So for first, physical boundaries, they refer to the personal space and physical touch. And they obviously include our bodies, sense of personal space, sexual orientation, or just our privacy in general. So these boundaries are just expressed through, for example, clothing, the noise tolerance which we have, the verbal instructions which we give or get from others, the body language which we provide, and a healthy physical boundary include really the awareness of what's appropriate and what's not, and in various settings and types of relationships. So for example, if you think about sometimes it's appropriate to just shake hands, sometimes it's a hug, or sometimes it's a kiss. So really the difference between these. And if physical boundaries are violated, for example, they are violated when someone comes too close into your personal space. So I will give you an example, like a close talker, for example. So your immediate and automatic reaction is to step back and to really reset your personal space and kind of communicate with your body language with a non-verbal message that this person is getting too close, and you feel kind of like the person is invading your personal space. And even if the person continues to move closer, you probably would let him know and tell him, hey, please, could you step a bit back? It's getting too close for myself. And obviously there are various ways how physical boundaries can be crossed, and some might even violate your privacy, or some of them are really like criminal acts. So it's clear there are various differences in these physical boundaries, and it's a bit hard to compare, like for example, a shoulder ticking with someone who's attacking you physically. So you see how broad these physical boundaries can be, and some of them are defined with law, for example. Others are just like how you feel about yourself and what is okay for yourself. So yeah, they're really a huge set of boundaries which you can think about right now, and they're very different and hard to compare.
Yeah, and with relation to this, physical boundaries can also be very different for people from different cultures. For example, in some cultures, I'm half Greek, half German, and we always do 2 kisses on each side. But I know that somewhere else there's 3 kisses on the cheek on each side, and other places where you only shake hands. And it really, even just greeting each other can be very, very different in many different cultures.
Yeah, that's a good example, Lisa. Like, even if I think I'm German, if I think about my culture, sometimes it feels a bit awkward giving like kisses to a stranger, you know, like as you do in the South. So it's really about like what is normal for us and how we feel about our own physical space, and it's unique to everyone. And some, even like in some cultures, we obviously have differences. So I guess some Germans are probably completely fine and love it, but others might feel completely different. So it's really, we all have individual differences in that. And yeah, these differences have some triggering points, like culture, for example, which shape them, but they're very different and unique to everyone.
Yeah.
So emotional boundaries refers to our like feelings and our beliefs and behaviors, or our choices, sense of responsibility, or really the ability to be intimate with with a partner or with someone else. So healthy emotional boundaries include, for example, like just sharing personal information in a gradual and appropriate way, and with the development of a relationship. So if you meet someone, you probably wouldn't let him know like every personal detail, some more of us than others, but this gradual shift maybe. And these boundaries protect our sense of like ourself and our self-esteem, and really protect us from becoming vulnerable in various aspects. So for example, the emotional aspect, which I mentioned, but also like financially or in other aspects. So emotional boundaries are violated when someone, for example, criticizes us, or really in kind of like just attacks our internal feelings. And people with weak emotional boundaries expose themselves to being like greatly affected by other words and by other thoughts, and even by their actions, and end up feeling like really like wounded or hurt, and even maybe like constantly blame others for their own problems or themselves. So they just have not this like emotional protections for themselves. And this could be present by not being able to protect your emotions, feeling from another person, or like where you really open yourself up and give the other person the chance to emotionally manipulate you as well. So you provide them a way to dictate how you should feel, and dictate kind of like your level of happiness, and give or sadness or any feelings you have, and you really give yourself and your emotions in the hand of the other person. And this is, as you can imagine, quite unhealthy, because you give up everything and you make your happiness and your well-being dependent on the other person, because you see kind of the approval as well, and like you want to please the other person, and just not take care of yourself anymore, and thereby maybe even lose sense of your own dreams and goals which you actually had. There are various other boundaries, obviously, like time, for example. So we all need our time for ourselves, some again more or less, like our knowledge and intellectual, which is like our own ideas and our own way of thinking about it, and no one can take that from us. And sexual boundaries obviously as well. And like the healthy sexual boundaries, for example, involve like mutually understanding and respecting each other's limitations and desires between each other, and they can be violated with unwanted touching or pressure to engage in acts, or like, yeah, even just with comments, for example. And it's clear that some of these boundaries are more focused on our personal openness to these, but others are really dictated by law. So there's a huge difference between like what we like is, or like what our personal boundaries are, and what the law decides for us as well. And yeah, we obviously know about the law, but maybe we need to communicate about like these personal boundaries a bit more to make them clear to the other person, because maybe the other person just does not know. So that's really important to outline.
Yeah, so I would just also like to emphasize on this point of communication, because so many misunderstandings happen with boundaries, whether it's physical boundaries, whether it's emotional boundaries, whether it's time boundaries. All of these different types of boundaries are very unique to every individual, to every situation, to every culture, and it can be influenced by so many factors. So if we start assuming that other people have similar boundaries to us, we can start having a lot of miscommunication between each other. So it's really good to have open communication about boundaries, because often we see boundaries as something, when we start talking about it, we feel personally attacked, but we shouldn't feel like that. We should feel like boundaries is something that we can talk about openly, that we can respect each other's boundaries and our own boundaries that we're aware of, and see it more as something, as personal growth, about learning about other people's boundaries as well, and respecting those, and appreciating that we are all unique in that sort of sense.
Yeah, that was a really good comment, actually. And we'll touch on that a bit more later, but I think it's really important to repeat that over and over, because it's so important. So where do boundaries come from? We all have our own personal boundaries, and there are various factors which how they can be formed, and which influence these boundaries. And one influential factor plays the family system we grew up in, the attachment which was provided by our parents when we were a child or an infant, and really dependent on how responsive they were and how available our caregivers was. We kind of developed our individual way of attaching to others when we grow up. So kind of like broadly speaking, attachment is either categorized as something where we feel secure, and it can also be categorized as more insecure. And there are various ways how you can feel that, like in, for example, insecure attachment is characterized by having the feeling that you cannot trust someone, and that you feel like yeah, there's just like, you need to approve yourself all the time. And while the more secure one is that you have this, like, you learn from being a child that someone is there, and there's this healthy relationship with someone else, and that the other person is available if you need it. So there's this like difference how we were kind of like taken care of when we were younger. And there are various other factors like personality traits, for example, which influence how, for example, extroverted or introverted we were, which influence the pace of how fast we share personal information with others, or like with poor self-esteem, like which stops us from saying no to another person. And obviously also like life experiences such as bereavement, or like really like sexual assault, which obviously shape our physical and emotional boundaries and our openness to, for example, sharing information, or just letting someone emotionally in to our feelings. And these boundaries are always not always fixed, and some show different characteristics depending on the environment and the situation we are in. And yeah, for example, someone could have healthy boundaries at work, but more like loose ones, or like different ones just in the relationship, and maybe just has a mix of all three within the family. So you see, like, they can shift dependent on the environment we are in and dependent on what kind of people surrounds us. And also the appropriateness of boundaries depend heavily on the setting, as we touched on before. And so what's appropriate to say when you're out with friends might not be appropriate when you're at work, or for example when you're in a different culture. And I also had an experience, like, for example, I spent some time in Estonia, and we were a big group of Spanish people as well, and Estonian people are really like shy in sharing personal information in the beginning. They build really like slower relationships than maybe in more southern countries. So I'm having this understanding of this person probably likes you, but it's just a different pace of how you share emotional or like just personal information, dependent on which setting you're in or which culture you grew up. So having this awareness is really important, that this is maybe a reason of not that the person or the other person doesn't like you, but it's based on other reasons and how they're used to share information. So yeah, really having this awareness of that.
Yeah, this awareness of also like all these different factors that contribute to our boundaries can help us to identify and respect each other's boundaries a little bit more, to understand that it's not just the personalities, but it's also the unique experiences that everyone has grown up in, and that these boundaries could have been formed from a very, very young age, from a different attachment style, and that many times these boundaries are formed not because they choose to form these themselves, but it's just because of the experiences that they have been through in their lives. And sometimes if somebody maybe has boundaries which might be a little bit unhealthy to them, for example, an insecure attachment style where it's really difficult for you to trust other people or to form an emotional attachment with other people, being aware of this, you can help these people, and they themselves can help themselves to understand that they have this sort of boundary, but maybe they can work on it and reflect upon this. And then in the future, maybe through CBT or therapy, they can be able to build better boundaries in order to have a more fulfilling and a happier lifestyle.
Yes, that's a really good point. So why are they important? Why are healthy boundaries so important? They're essential for both our physical and mental well-being, and they create like creating healthy boundaries is really the key to ensure relationships are mutually respectful and supportive and caring. So by recognizing the needs to set and enforce these limits, you protect your self-esteem, maintain self-respect, and really, empower yourself. And we also have to acknowledge that we all have different boundaries, which means that, as I mentioned before, we should be mindful of different signs, body language, and just maybe how another person communicates the boundaries to us, and accept them as they are. And unhealthy boundaries cause emotional pain that can lead to dependency, for example, or even like to depression or anxiety, and even like stress-induced physical illnesses. So signs for healthy boundaries. By now you probably know already what I mean with healthy boundaries and unhealthy ones, but I still share some key signs which might help you to identify if you may want to calibrate your boundaries a bit. So having this like healthy self-esteem and self-respect is a key for a healthy one. And so you really value your own opinion and are able to empower yourself to make this like healthy choice and take responsibility for yourself. And really knowing personal desires and needs and being able to communicate them openly and to others as well is really essential. So having this like self-confidence in letting the other person know how you feel, or that this is getting too close for you, or that you need some time off. So having this ability to communicate it, and just being assertive, as I said, just like having the ability to say yes or even like no, and being okay when others say no to you as well. So this is really important, having this ability to accept others' boundaries and other no's as well, and that you share personal information in a like healthy way, like a mutual sharing way and trusting relationship, and are able to just protect your physical and emotional space from another person manipulating you or intruding your personal feelings and your personal space. And as I said before, this like equal partnership where responsibility and power are really shared, and not not one having more than the other. And the ability to separate your own needs and thoughts and feelings and desires from maybe someone else, and being able to accept your own feelings about that and emotion, and that you're able to let the other person know how you feel about something, for example. And just as we mentioned over and over again, like accepting that your boundaries are maybe different from others, and that it's okay to have these boundaries, and just being aware of how important they are for your well-being, and maybe for the other person as well, like how important they are for the other person, even if you feel like you don't understand why the other person has this boundary, or lets you know like why does he need some time off, like just acknowledging the other person's difference is really important. So how can weak boundaries impact our well-being? Unhealthy boundaries are characterized, or you probably realize by now, that we can sort them in kind of like two categories. So the more rigid and the more porous boundaries. So for some people, too much closeness is anxiety provoking, and intimacy may be frightening for them, or they just like are afraid of losing something, or are afraid of being not surrounded by someone. And some may also avoid connecting with themselves due to kind of like harsh internal critic in themselves, and having this feeling of emptiness and depression can be as a result of that. And just having kind of like this difficulty giving and receiving care and concerns maybe. So ultimately this can lead, as I said before, to kind of physical issues like chronic diseases, but also like chronic feelings of loneliness. And rigid boundaries kind of show themselves in like that you have the feeling of protecting yourself the whole time from vulnerability. So wherever it could hurt, or you kind of like could potentially be faced with a loss or rejection, and which just maybe harms you a bit in like an emotional way. And so these characteristics are present in kind of like that you avoid intimacy, or you avoid kind of like close relationships to protect yourself from being hurt. And therefore you may struggle like really finding close relationships. And other people just seem really detached, and as mentioned before, just because of kind of like fearing being vulnerable, and having this distance gives them the feeling that they can protect themselves, and they're really protective of like any feelings or personal informations, and also really unlikely to ask for help, because it's again like this feeling of that someone can hurt them, or that they're vulnerable, and that they maybe are not good enough. On the other hand, when boundaries are too loose, we may easily take on the emotions and needs of others, and there's like a little sense of kind of like separate self, and we may even experience difficulties identifying our own emotions and needs. And people with loose boundaries often are really hypersensitive to others' comments and criticism, and really depend on the opinion of these others, and they really put their own values in their hand and put their well-being and everything, like what they feel, put in their hands. And so you can ask yourself, like, do you always make yourself available? Do you answer the phone no matter what's going on, for example? And you may struggle to say no to the request of your colleagues all the time. And so there's a difference between wanting to help people and not being able to say no to them. So without a strong boundary in place, we always keep going and saying like yes, and obviously as a result we might take on more than we can handle, or end up in a place or relationship that we don't want to be in, which can only lead to burnout and unhappiness for ourselves. So clearly these signs include over-involvement in others' lives, sharing too much personal information, like throwing ourselves to the other person. And some people are like really perfectionistic and people-pleasing. So when your boundaries are too loose, you can have this constant feeling of responsibility for everything and everyone, and you might feel powerless and really kind of like disconnected from your own feelings and what you actually need. So this is really exhausting for yourself, and yeah, sometimes even probably is really frustrating, and ends up with like compulsive acts, like for example that we don't know how to act on that, and we either work too much or we overeat a lot because we just have this like internal exhaustion in us and don't know where to put it.
Yeah, so I think also importantly to mention here, I guess it's just to be able to find this fine line, this balance for each individual between those rigid boundaries where you are protecting yourself and protecting your own feelings, but at the same time also having open boundaries by being vulnerable every now and then towards other people, because when we have relationships, it is sometimes inevitable that at some point there will be some sad moments, or maybe you will not be able to be with that person for a long time. But being open to that vulnerability can also teach you a lot of things and help you grow again and build more positive relationships in the future, and not letting negative situation make you build up these walls around you and make you have very rigid boundaries, because being able to accept also painful experiences and being able to learn from them can be quite healthy for you and for your boundaries.
Yes. So there are various barriers you probably face when we try to set these boundaries. So it's sometimes really difficult to allow ourselves to be okay with these boundaries, because we, for example, are faced with guilt in letting the other person know, no, we cannot take on another project, or we cannot help them this time. So having this guilt in ourselves can be really powerful and kind of prevent us to take care of ourselves and set this boundary. So there are other aspects like culture, which we touched on before, and some cultures, just are, for example, more used in being more in kind of like a polite way and struggle in saying no, as we would do it more in Western countries, where we are really direct and say, no, I cannot do that, or no, I won't be able to finish this project until next week. So having this like cultural aspect where some people are more polite in a way that they maybe not provide you with the clarity of like what they can do or what not. So being aware of that maybe. And also, as we touched on before, like having this certain attachment style, which is based on how our caregiver really nurtured us and created this like security of us allowing to trust other people and allowing ourselves to show emotions which not immediately kind of make us manipulated in a way, or having this like trust in the other person. And So these aspects are really like, can be a barrier for us to set this boundary. And having this fear of rejection and ultimately the fear of being abandoned by, for example, our partner can be a big part of us struggling with, for example, letting our partner know that we need some time off from them, and this is nothing personal, it's something for ourselves. But this fear stops us from letting the other person know, because we're afraid that the person does not understand, for example, or that this is not what they like, and then they maybe reject us in the end. So as I said before, this fear of confrontation, and there's a stigma around the concept of boundaries, as Alyssa mentioned before, as we tend to be kind of like really sometimes irritated if a colleague tells us, for example, just imagine like a colleague tells you this hug is too close for me, and yeah, as we're afraid to tell our partner that we need some time off, or like these things, which where we're afraid in ending in a misunderstanding, and they can stop us from, again, setting this boundary which we actually need. And therefore, I think it's really important that we shift our perception and see boundaries as something really positive and healthy, which is part of ourselves, but also part of our like surrounding people, of our society, and meaning like accepting other and acknowledging other boundaries as well, and being open to them, and not being offended if someone tells you I need some space, and we need to take care of that, because sometimes we just feel like we can't understand, or like, why is that? But if we allow ourselves to really accept it and be open, and if we don't understand, maybe ask the person, and let them explain a bit more why they feel about that, so that we understand a bit more. But just like acknowledging, even if the other person doesn't want to, or can't even explain it, just being open to that is really important. And obviously safety concerns are a barrier for boundary setting as well. So I still want to add something really important. So if you're dealing with someone who's really like physically dangerous or threatening to you, you may not be safe to attempt and set explicit boundaries with them. So if you're in this situation, it can be helpful to either go to the police, or really work with someone, with a counselor, therapist, or someone you trust, to create this like safety plan, and just not put yourself in risk. And boundary setting may be a part of like this therapy work. So be aware of that, dependent on who you're setting the boundaries with.
Yeah, it's also really important to keep in mind that when setting boundaries and when having conversations about boundaries, they can often get quite intense and quite emotional, because people can take them very personally. So just being aware of that and trying to stay calm in the situation, and trying to have a constructive conversation about boundaries, and keeping to the point without getting too emotionally involved, or personally attacking each other about something that might be quite meaningful to them. Trying to avoid these kinds of altercations by insulting each other, by just staying neutral and staying in a positive but serious tone as well, without making suggestions or assumptions about other people's boundaries, letting other people talk openly without interrupting them or assuming other things. Just having very calm conversations can help in this.
Yeah. So now we come to the more proactive side of the webinar. So how do we actually establish healthy boundaries? I mean, we touched on various things like communication and openness, but I think I would like to emphasize a bit more on like aspects which help you to kind of like understand, or like aspects of getting to know yourself. That means being aware of your innermost thoughts and feelings, beliefs and choices, for example, and your experiences. And it also means like knowing and connecting with those feelings and physical sensations. And this really will help you to be more clearly clearly define your needs when also your boundaries are crossed, for example. So yeah, learn to focus on your emotional experiences and how you express them. And by paying attention to your emotions and expressing them to others may be a really helpful strategy to, again, express your emotions. So, for example, letting them know I feel angry or I feel pressured, and thereby being mindful in how you frame it. So you may see the difference between you made me angry and I feel angry. So there's this there's a subtle but powerful shift in emphasis between the two, and the former really places the blame and assumes that the other person is responsible, and this often leads to defensiveness and yeah, just to misunderstandings, or even like yeah, to just really conflicts. And the letter really effectively communicates the same feeling, so about yourself, but eliminates the blame and indicates a more like personal acknowledgement and acceptance of the internal experience. So it's something you feel, and this is your boundary, and the other person has something different, and probably he feels completely different or whatever, but it's just about like that you communicate it. But to avoid this like conflict or misunderstanding, you can kind of like support yourself in framing it that it's about yourself and your own feeling, and this will help you to create this understanding in the other person as well. But this requires obviously like getting to know your feelings and emotions and allowing yourself to feel and express these emotions. So being aware of this and having self-awareness is really important. Identifying your values and desires. So what do you really want? What is truly important for you in your life? And getting a clear picture of what is just most important for yourself, and use these values to guide your decisions, and not allowing other persons to guide you in terms of like putting yourself in others' hands and losing track of what actually you want or what your values are, and using this to discover what you actually care about and what empowers you and what does not, and creating this awareness and identify really these values about yourself, and this internal like just goal, for example, and be aware of that, and thereby really be aware of black and white thinking. So if you struggle with saying no, you tend to think that your colleague will like you not anymore because you say no, for example. So you find it difficult to respond. If you find it difficult to let the other person know in the moment, no, I cannot help you, then allow yourself a pause and let them know that you will get back, for example, to them. And this will help you to really evaluate your boundaries and find maybe words to express them, so that you really allow yourself to have this boundary. And if you struggle finding the words, it's completely fine. Maybe let the other person know, I will come back to you. So that's a really helpful technique. Also, like as I said before, this pause is really important. So when you feel the urge to, for example, act really impulsively, or just stop and check in with yourself, and really ask yourself like what you're feeling, can you allow that feeling to be present without acting on them for a moment, and think about like what you actually need, or is it helpful how you think you would like to act, or is it more unhelpful in the end? And if you struggle with that, first maybe use like techniques as calm breathing for a moment, and really settle yourself down again, and really calm yourself and your emotions down, and then you will realize maybe what is helpful in the moment to act on and what is not in the end. So having this pause and maybe doing a breathing exercise can be really helpful for that. Also, like really acknowledging your boundaries. So you don't need to justify or get angry or apologize for these boundaries. They're completely fine. They're your individual ones, and you're not responsible for the other person's reaction to the boundary you're setting. So you're only responsible for communicating your boundaries in a respectful manner, obviously. And some people might test you and plan on it and really like push you to the edge. But yeah, just be firm and be consistent with yourself. And because yeah, this is really important. Your behavior must match your boundaries you're setting. Really, this is something which I really want you to think about, because if you, for example, allow yourself not to take this, or if you ask yourself like, okay, because this guilt comes in, I maybe this time I will shift my boundary a bit, or allow the other person to do something, or just allow or will try to help them again. You know, you need to be aware of that, and it's more about like how you frame it, and let the other person know about your boundaries, and then I'm sure they will learn it. Some people don't understand you are not used of that, and that's fine as well. But the more you repeat yourself and the more consistent you are with what your emotions are and communicate them, they will get used to it, I'm sure, and they will know how you feel about it, and what it's okay for you or not. And it's a process, so you have to communicate it over and over again. And this is, I think, really important to see that yeah, this takes time, and this is your own time frame, and no one can let yourself like tell you you need to change this boundary, because it's something about yourself, and not if you feel like you need like someone to talk about it, seek a support system like a friend or colleague who respects your boundaries, and maybe even distance yourself from persons who won't accept your boundaries, even if you communicate them over and over again. And this is something, yeah, really important, because if you can, obviously, but sometimes if persons don't accept these, it's not good for them, but also obviously not good for yourself. And maybe we need to take a step back then, and see if we feel better without them. This is harsh, but sometimes even like if we try and over again, this is just something we need to take care of ourselves, and allow ourselves to feel good about like what is right and what is wrong for ourselves. And if this is not respected, we need to act on that. So obviously not being mindful again, and being mindful about other people's expressing their emotions is really important as well. And giving yourself the permission to feel and identifying emotions within yourself is a key, I mentioned before. And yeah, just you're not accountable for their reaction, you're not accountable for their emotional experiences, you're only accountable for yourself. And this is why it's so important that you identify your own emotional boundaries and physical boundaries, and allow yourself to express your emotions. Once you have clearly really defined these boundaries, you no longer hold yourself responsible for the other people's emotion, and this obviously leads to healthy and more deeply satisfying relationships in the end. So this is really important. You probably still think about like guilt, and because guilt is a big topic, and like why we struggle sometimes with setting boundaries. So you set boundaries with someone, you say you can't loan the money, or you say you can't take them to work every day anymore, and you set your healthy boundaries, obviously, but then you have this feeling of guilt starting in, and you maybe start ruminating about the effect of your boundaries and this person, and the effect of your relationship with the person as well. And you start to question your boundary, and maybe even like backtrack, as I said before. And Sometimes we feel so guilty that we break our own boundaries, and we make exceptions for the other persons, and apologize over and over again. But we feel guilty because we think we prioritize our own needs over someone else's needs. And for some, setting boundaries can feel like we are rejecting others and being uncompassionate in the moment of their needs. But in reality, maintaining a healthy boundary helps to really develop a mutual relationship and nurtures, also our compassion for others. And I will provide you with some ideas how you might want to tackle if you're really filled with guilt in drawing this boundary. So the first one is like using reminders. So when guilt is coming in, really tell yourself the statement like, or with something you wrote down, like, it's okay to set boundaries and you did a good job setting a boundary, even though it's uncomfortable maybe in the moment. And just because I feel guilty doesn't mean I've done something wrong. So having this in mind and remembering yourself on this can help you to tackle the guilt. And identifying your limitations and personal reasons for setting your boundaries, because you have them. This is why they're there. And it's important to pick reasons that speak to your personal values, and writing them down or telling them to a good friend, for example. And when feelings of guilt start to really come in again, reconnect to these reasons again, and put them in front of you and really think about them. They're there for a reason, and they're there, for example, to increase your self-worth or reduce stress and resentment, or they're there for you to strengthen a mutual relationship. So having this in mind and remembering that, and really identifying these boundaries as well, and setting personal boundaries doesn't mean that we become selfish. It's something that that means we become assertive or confident and have a self-awareness, and really just encourage our own mental well-being. So this is really important for our health in general. So as I mentioned before, setting this boundary in a clear and compassionate way can be really helpful, because then you don't need to feel guilty. You might feel a bit guilty, and maybe for a reason, if you just if in a normal situation, I say now, like for example with a stranger, you don't want to kiss them because it's not appropriate for your culture. Like letting them know in an appropriate way and compassionate way and how you feel about it can be helpful, for example. So this is what I mean with that. So you cannot control how others feel and react to the boundaries you set, but you can do your part in delivering your message in a warm and clear way. And the importance of emphasizing with a person and labeling what's happening with a firm, will help you to draw this boundary as well. And I think it's so important to see it as a skill, and it will get easier with practice, and it might feel awkward letting another person know how you feel in the moment, but it will help you in the end, and you will get used to it, and the other person or your partner or your colleague will get used to it as well. So it's about this like consistent and repeated communicating of your boundaries, and this practice with it will help you to feel less guilty, and will help you to just be more confident in letting other persons know about your boundaries as well. And essentially your boundaries are your way of really telling people how you feel, how you would like to be treated. And as you become more skilled in that way on setting your boundaries, you will 100% have a huge shift in how people treat you as well. And this, I think, is the key. And this is what we want as well if we set this boundary.
Yeah, what can also really help with setting these boundaries, as Johanna had mentioned before, building this self-awareness of your boundaries is really important, and maybe taking some time to yourself by using mindfulness techniques and meditation techniques to reevaluate your feelings and reevaluate the situation that made you feel some type of way. to see maybe there were some boundaries which you weren't even aware of, which were subconscious boundaries to you. You've just been feeling some type of way of some sort of situation, but you're not sure exactly what it is. So taking some time to yourself, to use some meditation, to use some mindfulness techniques, to reevaluate your emotions and see if you do need to act upon them or if you don't need to act upon them, because sometimes it's about also just accepting the emotions that you're going through in the moment, and building awareness that you do not always need to act upon every single situation that has made you feel some type of way. Sometimes acceptance is the way forward.
Yeah, no, that's a good point, actually. Thanks, Alyssa. Yeah, actually, now we came to the end, and we touched on various aspects, so like where boundaries come from, so that there are various reasons why we developed, and our boundaries, how they are, so depend on like our caregivers' attachment provided us with, and how available they were, and in which culture we are in, or just in which environment or which people surround us. So there are various aspects and which influence how we have like confidence, for example, or how our boundaries are drawn. So just being aware of these differences is really essential, and having these like awareness for like what is healthy for yourself, and maybe having this awareness and being mindful to yourself, and that it's okay to take care of yourself, that it's okay to communicate these boundaries, and getting away from this like negative perspective to it's great and it's healthy to have this boundary and you need it, because otherwise you probably will end up being really emotionally depleted or manipulated by others. So taking care of yourself and allowing to use these steps, which I mentioned before, to really help yourself to make these boundaries clear, and communicating them in a assertive way will help you to both feel better about yourself, but also feel better about how other people would treat you in the future. So this can be really helpful. And I hope you gain some insightful tips from our webinar, and now you will have the chance to ask whatever you like to. Thank you very much for those who will drop out. Have a nice afternoon.
Yeah, so there's a question here. Somebody asked, can you please talk more about moving from anxious attachment to secure attachment in intimate relationships?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think being aware of that is already really helpful. Being aware that you maybe are more like afraid of losing, for example, your partner, or like being afraid of communicating because you fear of the of the loss or of a confrontation, and allowing yourself to have these emotions, and reflecting on them, maybe reflecting on, are they actually true, or is my partner actually there, and maybe even would appreciate having maybe more often an open conversation about your fears as well, so that you can understand why you feel that way or why you act on that. So creating this self-awareness on what your emotions are, and trying to communicate them, and communicate them to your partner as well, will help you to really maybe start calibrating from this attachment to a more secure one. And I think really maybe the CBT program can be really helpful for that. It's just about like reflecting on your emotions, and starting to be a bit more aware on, are they appropriate? Are they actually true? Is my partner actually there, or is there no reason for myself to being anxious for the moment? Just creating this reflection, and being open to yourself, and it's okay, you won't feel overnight like that you changed your way of how you are with your partner, or how you have this relationship, but having this gradual shift, and just not feeling guilty about it, not being afraid, in a way that you reflect on why you feel that way, and open yourself up and allow yourself and your emotions to be expressed to your partner as well. Lisa, maybe you have another idea, but this is what I thought.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you. Having this self-awareness that maybe somebody has this anxious attachment, being able to understand the situation and being able to understand the feelings that bring this anxious attachment can already help you to move to a more secure attachment style, because you've already built this self-awareness. That means that you're already working on it. So it's really just about self-awareness, and as well as domination, as Johanna said. There's another one by Pam. Is it the case that I feel that a number of different people treat me the same way, but not the way I want to be treated, that I'm not being clear enough about my boundaries?
Well, I think sometimes
Sorry.
Sorry, Lisa, you're a bit.
Oh no, you go ahead. Sorry, the internet connection just kind of dropped off.
No, I just thought, I think sometimes even if we try to communicate our boundaries in a clear way, we face that people sometimes don't understand how we set them, and maybe we need to take one person aside and ask them, was I not clear about that, or how would you like me to express it so that you can understand? But also having this awareness, you're not responsible how other people act on them, or what they feel about this, and maybe expressing them in an even more clearer way can help you. So sometimes it feels a bit awkward letting them know in a really clear sentence, this is not how I want to. This is, I feel, for example, being aware of how you frame it, and letting the other person know, I feel, so it's about yourself, and then letting them clearly know how you feel. Maybe this will help you again to create this bigger awareness of other different people. So this is what comes into my mind for now. But having this internal focus, and that it's about me and I feel this way, will help the other person maybe to understand you a bit more, and then really being really clear what you want or what you don't want will help you, I'm sure.
Yeah, exactly. Being clear can help you to build better relationships with other people, and being open exactly to what it is that's bothering you and what's working and what's not working is the way to move forward. And then if you come to a point of acceptance that this is how it is, and don't let it get to you. Don't dwell on things or catastrophize about situations that you might not be able to change.
Yeah.
I think that's all of the questions today. We've come to the end of the webinar.
Yeah, thank you very much for joining us today. And if you have any additional questions, you have always the chance to come back to us later. So feel free to do that. But thank you very much for joining, and I hope this was helpful.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. Bye.
Bye.